that time in the morning when we take a look at the stories making the front pages of today's international newspapers. And joining me for a sift through the headlines, or a stroll, is the writer and blogger Jen Smit. A very good morning to you.
Good morning.
Quite a few stories to choose from. One which you've picked on first, in fact, is the Australian. And it's a quote, in fact, "The Major needs to see you." And that's a quote from Peter Greste, the freed Al Jazeera journalist, at the bottom of the page, talking about that walk to freedom.
Yeah, and this is a story that has made news over the last couple of days since news
years.
broke. That's true. But most recently, because of his release from prison after 400 days. This piece in the Australian, though, is a bit more of an informal type story rather than just the facts and figures relating to the release. It's a bit more of a personal account, and we saw earlier today on the show a bit of a personal account from Peter himself, talking about how it felt, that moment of release. And really this is the human side of the story, and particularly his feelings about leaving the two other journalists who are still being held in that prison.
Yes.
Those are the journalists Mohammed Fahmy and Bahim Mohammed. And both of them, obviously, what Peter Greste is saying is that if it's right for him to be freed,
sure,
then these two gentlemen should be freed as well.
Because that was certainly something that was picked up on by a lot of Egyptians when the announcement was first made that Peter Greste would walk free, because they saw it as one form of justice for the foreigner, the Westerner,
yes,
but another for Egyptians, even though one of those held behind has dual nationality, Canadian and Egyptian.
Yes, so Canadian and Egyptian. He's applied under the same rules as Peter Greste to be deported to Canada. Whether that happens or not remains to be seen, but the other gentleman has purely got Egyptian citizenship and therefore is relying on a retrial. So it does seem like almost three forms of justice, or three approaches for people who are essentially imprisoned for the exact same reason. So it's very inconsistent, and I think very hard for both the gentleman inside and for Peter Greste on the outside, feeling, well, he's very lucky, but there's a certain amount of guilt there, I think, as well.
Yes. I mean, the other interesting thing as well is that these three men were in prison, but there were other Al Jazeera journalists who were working in Egypt around the same time of the Arab Spring. For example, Sue Turton, she can't go back because they've been jailed in absentia.
I'm not hugely familiar with that story, so I'm not sure.
But I suppose the point that I'm getting at is that you've had three people who've been jailed. One of them has been released. Hopefully the other two will be released. But then it also leaves those who've been jailed in absentia in a sort of legal limbo.
Yeah, do they go back and attempt to start covering stories again? Are the rules going to apply to them, or are they not? So yes, there is a bit of juggling to be done.
Sure, but I suppose the other interesting thing which emerges from this article as well is the friendship that built up between the three men, that they obviously worked together, they worked very well together, but I suppose that a professional friendship has now become a very personal friendship because of this shared experience. And I think that, did you talk about, for example, Peter Greste's parents attending the birth of the son of one of these men? And
it's a beautiful little story that basically in August, Greste's parents were invited to the birth of, or not to the birth, but when the baby was born. And
post-birth.
Yes, post-birth. And Mohammed actually wrote a brief note to the family, and he said to his son, "The moment you will arrive, you will meet two great Australians. Together we are sharing the struggle, and together we will celebrate your birth. They are your family, and their sons are your father's brothers, so don't be shy of them." So a very strong bond has definitely emerged out of this.
OK, let's move on now to a more serious story. You've gone for the Wall Street Journal Europe. And the headline, "All smiles, but UK's Osborne delivers a warning." So the Osborne in question, the Chancellor of Exchequer, or Finance Minister in the United Kingdom, George Osborne, greeting his Greek counterpart on the steps of number 11 Downing Street.
Yes, that's the Greek Finance Minister, Yanis Varoufakis. I probably pronounced that terribly wrong.
You pronounced it very well, Varoufakis. That's very good.
But the minister is doing a tour of Europe. He's wanting to persuade the European parties that essentially they should reduce austerity measures on Greece. This obviously following the election last month. And I think he's saying that Greece is now tired, and we need an opportunity to boost economic growth. And if you recall, Obama said something recently as well about the fact that you cannot suppress economies and squeeze those economies forever. You do actually need to allow them to make some own decisions that will allow to growth so that they can pay back their debts.
So in a sense, he's actually got the world's most powerful man on his side.
Well, certainly that did have an impact.
That's the inference.
Yeah, that is the inference. But if you have a look at the factory sector, that shrank to its fastest rate in 15 months in January. So the Greek economy is still suffering a lot. And there is obviously great fear, I think, amongst not just the rest of Europe, but also the rest of the world. And you'll see here the headline does say it's, not this headline, but a lot of the headlines today are talking about its impact on the global economy, not just on the Greek economy, on the European
Well, the economies
economy.
are so interconnected, and that's the point, that there are lots of banks who've been lending, etc., to Greece. So again, if they have to write off some of that debt, how big an impact will that be on their balance sheets? Where's the money going to be recovered? And particularly if they're not particularly, well, if they do have some protection, but perhaps it's not enough to shield them, could it take them down? I don't think it will, but again, it's the impact, punching a hole.
Yeah, absolutely, and people are just nervous about what that is going to mean.
But do you also sense a slightly bigger game that appears to be emerging here, that on the one hand, at the start of this all, it was basically Greece against the world, and now it appears as if Greece is slowly acquiring allies to its position. We've had these comments from Barack Obama which appear to show support. Also, it seemed from the mouth of George Osborne and indeed the Bank of England Governor Mark Carney, but also as well, it does appear to be isolating Germany, because Germany has been the one saying, hang on a minute, you can't rewrite the rules, you signed up to a contract, pay up.
Well, I think if you look at what the UK's position as well, and considering the Eurozone and what role it wants to have in Europe, is probably, as you say, correct that there is a bit of a rebalancing happening, and whether Greece is now going to be gaining allies against, is it against Germany? Is it just a re-emergence of or a restructuring of the European economy? I'm not an economic expert. I'm not going to put too much behind anything, but yes, I do think it's a bit of a political game as well.
There's certainly some chess playing that's going on, as we saw in our news coverage as well. You've actually had these anti-austerity measures or programmes, or protests, I should say, happening in Spain. So Greece's stand is being seen as a bit of a template for all those other weak European economies who are being told the way out is austerity. You've got to bite the bullet, whether you like it or not.
And I think people just get to a point, very personally, you get tired of it. People want to be able to move forward. It's quite depressing to always work in an environment where it's austerity and we must, batten down the hatches sort of thing. People just want to get on with it. And I think maybe they were getting braver because of that, because they're tired of being depressed about the economy. Let's just try and do something proactive. And maybe that's not the right way, but it feels like a change in direction, which maybe in itself is a bit more uplifting for people.
And I suppose as well that even though governments say, look, we have to endure it because there'll be sunshine at the end of the corridor, it doesn't feel as if the pain is being evenly distributed, because you've got this awful underclass of impoverished people in Greece. I mean, it is terrible how you've had people who've had stable careers and they're now actually relying on aid, whatever aid they can get. And then on the other hand, at the other extreme, you've got the billionaires who are living a life of Riley. They've been untouched by this.
Exactly, and you can't make it look in any way fair to these people. So they're now just starting to fight back.
OK. Well, let's stay with the money theme, but of a different kind. And we've gone for The Guardian online. And an interesting spin on a very famous game that we've all played in our lives. Monopoly Maker secretly includes real money in a special edition of the game.
I know, and this sounds like a dream come true. And it's been a long time since I played Monopoly, but I think now would be a good time to start again.
Only if it retails at the price that you pay for the game with the toy money.
Yes.
That's the sting.
So apparently there's 30,000 games, and within these 30,000 boxes, there are a couple of boxes where you will get real notes, and this is to celebrate the 80th anniversary of the game in France. There's only one set, though, that's got all the money replaced with the exact replica, of the notes will be replaced by real money. So that's around 20,000 euros that somebody will pick up in that one game.
Yeah, but how much do they have to spend to actually buy that box?
Well, it's like playing the lotto, I guess. Somebody might just say, at least I'll get a game out of it. But I think it's quite a nice celebration. Whether there'll be a run of Monopoly boxes, I don't know. It was quite fun. They actually had a real bailiff come and count the notes and make sure.
The security to get into the
very
factories.
Much. The notes had to be come in in stealth. And the one problem they did find is that the boxes, while the weight didn't change, the boxes to fit the real notes started to. It was a bit of a squeeze.
It didn't fit properly.
So it didn't quite fit. So there might be a telltale sign, but I'm pretty sure they fixed that up before they distributed
But you
the
see,
games.
the thing which gets me about this, I think it's a fantastic idea, but when you're playing Monopoly, at the end of it, when you have the toy money, everybody returns the little motives, they return the cash, goes back into the pot, we redistribute. Now, come on, if you've actually bankrupted somebody in a game of Monopoly and you walk away with 20,000 euros, are you really going to return it?
To be honest, I'm not sure if the person who actually gets that game is genuinely going to play the game itself. I think there'll be too much celebrating going on, so perhaps bankruptcy won't come into it.
But when that's the objective of Monopoly, though, it's to bankrupt people playing property.
Yes, it is.
I mean, it's lethal because we all have memories of playing Monopoly. I'm an estate agent's daughter, and me and my siblings, when we played it for real. It was actually quite vicious, so there you go.
It did say that this has been breaking up friends and family for many, many years.
Right, well, we're still together as a family, but that was with the toy money. I dread to think what would have happened if the notes were for real. But, Jen, we'll break off. We will return to you a little bit later on in the morning for a review of the rest of the day's international newspapers. But for now, thank you. Okay, it's time now for another look at the stories making the front pages of today's international newspapers. And joining me to once again sift through the day's headlines is the writer and blogger Jen Smit, a familiar face to our many viewers. Thank you so much for joining us, Jen. Now, you have chosen the Moscow Times. And, well, it's not so much a question, it's more of a declaration. We're going to give you the answer to this. Why Putin is immune to recession.
Yes, and this is something that we've discussed several times before, actually. The fact that why is Putin still so popular, even when the economy is struggling? Because previously everyone said, oh, he's struggling, the economy is fine, and that's why Putin is still doing well. But now we've got the oil prices dropping, the economy is no longer a factor. So what is it? This article talks about the fact that really Putin represents a sense of community, and it's really talking about the emotional side of Russia, and he's symbolic. It's this symbolism, and that's where people are feeling that, yes, he is still the right person for the job. And an interesting fact here is that, you know, in his 15 years on or off in power, his approval rating has never dropped below 60%.
Which is absolutely extraordinary, because how many politicians in the West would beg for a figure like that?
Absolutely. It is unheard of. At the moment, he's still sitting at 85%, which is incredible. Now, as I said, this article looks specifically at the more emotional side, but there's lots of other issues to consider, and some would say, well, hang on, is there a bit of an information vacuum in Russia? Are they actually getting the full picture? The other thing to consider is that a lot of educated Russians have left Russia over recent years. You've got an exodus of about 300,000 people in 2012 to 2013.
Has anyone actually polled their opinion?
No, and this most recent poll was about 1,600 people. But if you think that 300,000 people left Russia at around about the same time that Putin came back into the spotlight, that maybe says something about the kind of people that are being polled and who are voting, and also what information they have access to.
So maybe treat that figure of 85% with a little bit of caution, if not a pinch of salt.
Yes.
OK, let's move on to your other choice. And you've gone for the Jakarta Post. This is the Indonesian newspaper. And quite an extraordinary story. Hotel occupancy down on austerity policy. Now, it does seem a little bit misleading at first until you actually go behind the headlines, and then your jaw drops in astonishment, really.
I'm surprised that this kind of story actually makes it to the papers, because essentially it's saying that the hotel residency is down and this is going to be a big problem for the economy, but it's all based on a new policy that bans government officials from living lavish lifestyles.
And that's the point. It's the government officials who are actually pushing down the occupancy rather than the tourists.
Rather than the tourists. In fact, tourism rates have gone up. So the tourists are still coming in, but essentially the government officials being told, no, we have to save money. You may not hire villas and fancy hotels for your conferences and meeting rooms. You use your own meeting rooms and your own offices.
You can just imagine it. If you're a tourist, you have a budget. So you have to operate within that budget.
Yes.
If you're a government minister, you have an unlimited budget. You can have all sorts of perks.
Absolutely, and the president's target is slashing the 2015 budget for government officials' meetings and travel by the equivalent of US dollars 1.31 billion. That's a quite incredible amount just for your travel.
GDP or something.
So,
in some instances.
yes, I was quite amazed to see this story actually appearing.
I'm pleased you chose it, because one of the stories that we're following today, we picked up off it yesterday, was this attempt to actually bring peace to South Sudan. And there were a number of European diplomats who've been following these negotiations, and they said, from what we can see, there is a refusal, a reluctance to actually forge some kind of a peace deal, partly because you've got all these people going to hotels and they're having a great time. So it seems as if peace is secondary, and self-fulfilment in these spas is what matters most.
And that's a very scary thought. If that's the way politics has been done in one country, that may be happening in other countries. And who's to say where our politics could be if people weren't having a fine time in villas? And I suppose people question Davos as well. People going to a wonderful ski resort.
But then I suppose that people need to be relaxed when they're making decisions that count. So,
yes.
Well, that's the theory anyway. Let's move on now to another sad story. Now, last year, of course, one of the big-name celebrities that we lost was the American actor Robin Williams, who tragically committed suicide. The Daily Telegraph online, the online version of the British paper, the battle for Robin Williams' estate.
And it's always, for me, so sad when families descend into, not chaos, but just this awful negativity around somebody who was so loved. So Robin Williams, who sadly passed on in August last year, he's got a substantial estate and obviously a lot of memorabilia as well relating to his career. And what's happening now is that his wife, who he'd only been married to for about 3 years.
Was she his second or third wife?
Second or third, I'm not quite sure. But the children, Robin Williams' children, are from previous marriage. And he's got 3 children. And his wife has now raised a court case against them and to try to contest the will. Now, on one hand, I can see to a degree why she would be doing that, because what the courts are saying is that if you don't want to be in a situation where the home that she lives in and continues to live in, that she shared with him,
she gets turfed out.
Basically gets stripped, because the agreement was that she would get to keep what they had built up in her marriage, and he wanted her to carry on living in that home. But she's now saying that the kids will come in, and they have already.
They've been helping themselves.
She says that they have been helping themselves. But it's just nasty, and you never want this to descend into nastiness.
It is, and I mean, time is running very, very tight, but considering that he made it clear who got what, it does seem rather extraordinary that the fights are now starting, and of course the only winners are the probate lawyers. Yeah,
and the press to a degree, because now we get a story out of it, and it's just sad all around.
It is very, very sad, and one hopes that it doesn't actually spill over into one person briefing against another on the TV camera. Yeah. But Jen, we have to leave it there. An absolute pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much for taking us through your choice of international newspapers.
Thanks.
Thank you.